suppose I have a bad day at office, I come home and I tell my kids, you know what, today this thing happened. And I felt so terrible, but I still feel that if I had taken a deep breath, maybe I would have handled this situation this way.
Ah, well said.
So
Yeah.
where you're saying you are admitting to your own imperfections, again, which Brené
Yes,
talks
yes,
about, because
yes,
the more we come across to our kids as saying, Mama is perfect, Daddy is perfect, they can never go wrong. The
Yes.
minute they make a mistake, they are so ashamed.
Correct.
Again, Brené talks about shame as one of the most toxic and difficult emotions to handle.
Hi, we are the Confident Communicator, and I am Seema Mehta, along with my partner Deepma Jadeja. Welcome to Imperfect Parenting. Together, let's get on a journey of discovering kindness, success, and happiness courageously, fearlessly, and by holding ourselves to a standard of grace, not perfection. It is our mission at the Confident Communicator to empower kids and adults discover their own uniqueness through our coaching, training, and soft skills program. We welcome you to a new chapter of Imperfect Parenting, a series dedicated to discovering our own uniqueness without judgment by chiseling away all superfluous materials within ourselves.
Hello, everyone. This is Seema Mehta, along with my partner Deepma Jadeja from the Confident Communicator. Every week, we talk to you guys on our series, The Imperfect Parenting, where the idea of this program is to help parents build strong, resilient, and courageous children. These are tough times for our kids, and we have an incredible guest today, Meena Iyer, introducing Meena Iyer, who is a counseling psychologist now based in Bangalore, which we are very excited about. She was earlier in Pune. She's had 20 plus years in the corporate world, working in advertising, sales, and print and TV. But most important, she's such an important counselor, therapist, and a person who's interested in healing children, dealing with childhood trauma. And that's why today the conversation that we are going to have is about an important topic, which, as parents, we say things like, I have taught my child the right values. I know they know the difference between right and wrong. Yet sometimes the external forces and environment that they come from are so powerful that things like addiction come into the play. So today's topic is about addiction. And Meena, welcome to the show. There is so much more about you that I should talk about. You are running your own rehabilitation center, and other than cognitive therapy, your expertise includes alternative modalities like Reiki, hypnotherapy, NLP, and EFT. You are very passionate about healing childhood trauma and core issue resolution. And here's an exciting thing. She writes a self-help blog in the Times of India titled In Spirit. So welcome, Meena. We are so honored to have you on our show.
Thank
welcome,
you,
Meena.
Seema. And thank you, Deepma. It's my privilege to be here today. Let's begin.
So Meena, let's just demystify this whole thing. What exactly is addiction? Because when we were growing up, for us, addiction would be something like, oh, maybe you're doing drugs, But things have changed. There's a lot of different types of addictions that have come up. But what is exactly an addiction? And tell us a little bit more about that, and then we can go into some other questions.
Right. The important thing to understand about addiction per se, and yes, it's used most often in the context of substance addiction when you're ingesting a harmful substance, right, like alcohol or drugs, like you mentioned. So if you look at the basic bare bones WHO definition, they say consuming a harmful substance despite consequences. That is the basic definition.
Correct.
Compulsively consuming a substance that is harmful,
Right.
and it's harmful, and you've had harmful consequences, and you keep on consuming,
and yet you keep consuming it. Yes.
Right. And then now the definition of addiction has been widened to cover not just addictions of consumption or ingestion, but addictions of behavior. any activity that you're doing compulsively and that you know is not good for you, it has harmful consequences. You've gone through harmful consequences repeatedly, and yet
Let you do it.
you keep doing it, and you do not possess the strength or the mental
Will.
balance to
Yeah.
stop doing it, and
So
you need help to come out of
why
it.
would that's like the most obvious question then would be that why is it that people get addicted? What is
Okay.
the reason behind that? Knowing that there are these consequences. I mean, with kids we understand sometimes the prefrontal cortex is not formed, they don't know what the consequences are, but it happens also in adults. So what is the reason why people are so addicted?
You see, addiction, if you understand addiction psychologically, it's about addiction exists as a coping mechanism to some other stressful factor in the person's life,
Yes.
right?
True.
Nobody wants to be an addict.
Correct.
Nobody embraces addiction. Addiction is actually, if you look at the emotion underlying addiction, it's powerlessness. People are powerless against their addictions. They don't do it by choice. So if you take the example of something as common as let's say smoking, right? It starts out as something like standing up for yourself in a peer scenario, trying to be macho or whatever. If it's for
Being
the
part
guy,
of the
now
group.
it's for the
Yeah, you
girls,
want to fit
trying to
in.
look cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely, trying to fit in. So it starts out as something that you just say that, oh, have you got the guts to do this? Let's try it out. You've seen
Yes.
adults do it. You've seen mafia dons and Hollywood movies do it. So why don't you
Yes.
give it a shot?
Yeah.
And then at the other end of the spectrum is somebody who can't stop smoking, because then there is an addiction. There is a physiological addiction to the nicotine itself.
Correct.
And then comes the aspect of having gotten addicted is when you can't stop it. You can't stop it because that has become your crutch, your coping mechanism for stress.
Yes,
Right.
yes. I was just doing a little bit of research about addiction, Meena, and it was interesting to me. I mean, we know obviously instinctively and with our peer groups and raising children, we know what is addiction and all of that. But as I was doing the research before talking to you, I realized that there are some addictions, like you said, which deal with powerlessness, which deal with wanting to fit in, with actually being a coping mechanism that doesn't feel good. For example, alcohol and smoking, both the first drink or the first cigarette are not necessarily fun. They make you
Yes.
cough, they're a horrible taste, it's more
Absolutely.
psychological than physiological. And then there's others, like some of the drugs, about how they make you feel. They make you feel fabulous, they make you feel like king of the world, they make you feel like you nothing else matters, only what you're feeling right now, the joy or the bliss that you're feeling right now matters. But then another thing I heard was, when you get into this, you're constantly chasing that first high, but you are never able to replicate that first high. Can you talk a little bit about that with all levels of addiction?
Right. You're talking about the first high. Actually, there's a lot of hype around these things if you look at it. So one is the actual experience. Okay. One of the experts now in the field of de-addiction, and he's done so much work, and now there's I think 2 films out, is Dr. Gabor Mate, the Canadian he's actually not even a psychotherapist. He's a doctor who works in Canada, and he's worked extensively all over Europe, rehabilitating a bunch of street addicts, right? These are people who have extremely difficult lives, and they actually suffer so much that the experience of being intoxicated is something that is the only time that they feel normal. So that's the kind of person I'm talking about.
Yeah, and that's what they're pushing.
And
Yeah,
that's such a huge coping mechanism, like you said. I think it's really, I mean, it's kind of scary actually.
Yeah. So to quote him, he says, like, for them, like, the first hit of heroin feels like a warm hug. So these are children who've never got a warm hug in their lives. So they have to literally inject themselves with, a harmful substance like heroin to replicate a warm hug, right? So that's on one side. Now, talking about the high, if you just look at a high, one is the mental anticipation around it. If you look at any movie which shows youngsters having a good time, so they go to a pub or they go to a lounge, they go to a discotheque, right? And
Yeah.
then they're drinking and everything. And then somebody will say shots, and then they're doing shots back to back.
And then you
So
see the
there's
body
this whole,
language changes. Yeah.
yes. So the hype that's been created around, you have to be high to enjoy. You
Correct.
have to be high to let loose, right? Many young people will say, I have to be X number of drinks down to get up and start dancing. So these are all myths that they've picked up. They've not even experienced it, but they've heard it so often that they've, adopted it as their own belief. They've made it their own.
Yeah.
They have no clue
But-
how it's
but-
going to feel.
Meena, that sounds like there are two people inside your mind. It almost sounds like there are two characters inside your mind. So there is this one character who is, before drinking, is this person who's very nervous about getting onto the dance floor, is very conscious about judgment, is very uptight, right?
Yes.
And then there is the next character who's had a drink, and somehow the drink has relaxed that judgment and doesn't really care anymore about what anyone thinks, really wants to have a good time and becomes a free spirit.
Yes.
There is a reason why this need to have this high is predominantly visible in human beings today. So I'm assuming there are some coping mechanisms that we don't need to resort to these kind of things. And
Absolutely.
what risks our children are at? Because this sounds a little bit scary and terrifying that we can't have a different form of self-control. So
yes,
you want to talk a little
So,
bit about
Seema,
that?
what I want to say about this is, if you look at this entire like graph of addiction, right? Of not addiction, actually, let's just look at consuming substances. Like, even since you talked about, we're taking the example of dancing.
Yeah.
The action of alcohol is to lower inhibition. That's all it does.
That's all
right?
it is.
So, and let's say since it's all over the place, everybody's talking about it. By the time a person is, I don't know, maybe say, let's say safely, say, put it as say 18 or 19, a person would have had some experience, unless there has been strong instruction and, from the family saying, no, we will never have alcohol. So, unless there is some orientation like that, I think every 18-year-old is going to say, oh, I'm going to have my first drink, right? I'm going to have my first drink and relax. Might be a glass of wine, might be you have so many breweries here in Bangalore. So I'm assuming, a freshly brewed, and then, what I was trying to say was that there is this first experience, which will make the person feel a little light, and, the inhibitions are lowered. But as you progress, and as a person consumes more and more alcohol, not only the inhibitions, but the mood is also being lowered, which is why you see that at the end of when a large quantity has been consumed, the person is crying, they're not able to walk, so all the motor functions, the connection of the brain to the motor functions, everything has slowed down.
Also goes
So
down.
ultimately, that's where it ends up, even if we look at just the physiology. Now, if you look at the psychology of it, we all know, by experience that, you don't need to lower your inhibition. Like right now, we're having a very intimate conversation about issues that really matter. And none of us has consumed anything stronger than maybe coffee, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're able to
choice
do
is
it.
coffee. Yes.
Absolutely. So I just want to separate these two things. One is the myth. If I have a drink, I will look cool, I will feel good, and I will enjoy myself. And one is the actual experience. Also, I want to draw the line, because I know a lot of parents are watching, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s are watching. Very clearly, there's a distinct line drawn between social drinking, social consumption of alcohol, and alcoholic or addictive drinking, where we're talking about a person finally reaching a stage where they will need a liver replacement, right?
Or where they can't stop, right?
They can't stop, and therefore physiologically the damages are something that they have no clue about and that they cannot control. Now, why do they reach that stage? Obviously, they're not enjoying themselves. They're not dancing. They're not getting all creative and getting happy ideas. That's the stage where it's become a coping mechanism, where it's not a normal person having a drink or two to enjoy themselves, but a dysfunctional person having a drink to even feel normal. So there's a complete reversal over there.
Different.
Correct.
Absolutely.
So then how do we, Meena, how do we recognize which one our child is, right?
Absolutely.
Someone who's doing it for the right reason. Alcohol is a legal drug, but even other drugs that are illegal substances,
yes,
whatever it is that you're doing, the reasoning has to be that
why are you doing it? Are you doing it to feel that warm hug because you never have? Or
Yes.
are you doing it as a coping mechanism? Or are you doing it to fit in? And how do we start that conversation with our children at the different ages so that they feel empowered to say no when it's becoming a problem? Or, in the case of drugs, say no the first time.
Right. I want to say a little bit about, firstly, about what home environments are. I realize that there are some homes where there is no alcohol, right? Where abstinence is followed, the traditional homes. But I think that is becoming rarer and rarer. I think, in most homes, either the father consumes alcohol, or children are used to seeing their parents' friends come over and everybody enjoying a drink, and then having a meal and things like that. So there is a direct experience of how it happens. Now, when to talk to a child? When a child first experiences or sees that maybe somebody, or hears that somebody got drunk and did something that was not okay, that they would not have done had they not had that drink, in their senses, in their sober state, that is a time to address it with the child. That you see, this is alcohol, right? Otherwise, in a lot of homes, I've heard, and since I've worked with many alcoholics and addicts, I've heard that, in our home, we were taught that alcohol is a bad thing, don't touch it. And then this whole health issue gets collapsed with social sanction, which messes it all up, right?
Correct.
As we're talking, let me say this, that there's nothing wrong with alcohol. The fault is not in alcohol. It is in, the pattern that it's being consumed. And like you said, the reason for which it is
Why?
consumed, and the impact it is having on the person who is consuming it.
Correct.
Okay. Because if it, honestly, because we can't ban alcohol or wipe it off the face of the earth. I have met desperate mothers who have told me, I wish there was no such thing as weed. I wish a thing like cocaine had not been invented, because they've been at the receiving end of severe damage, right? But let's be practical, that's not even possible.
Yeah.
Okay. It's possible to tell our kids that here is a substance called alcohol. People enjoy it. It's enjoyed in cultures all over the world. You have a glass of wine with your food, or, to lighten up a bit. This is what it looks like. This is what it does to you physiologically. And this is what it does to you psychologically.
Right.
However, when it is going to be consumed beyond a certain quantity, this is the impact it has. And if we can have these conversations, with our kids, telling them this is what it is before they have their first drink, that this is what alcohol can do to you, so that there is no unnecessary, discomfort, and there is no sticky sort of morality around it.
I think you're trying to normalize it. I think that's the word I would use, because you're trying to normalize it. Yes, it is. I cannot produce a perception in front of you that doesn't exist. I cannot say, no, alcohol is so bad for you, we should never have any bottles in our house, when the rest of the world is enjoying a sip of wine in an evening. And then we put that fear in that social fear that, that, okay, this is not right, this is not good, the morality part of it. So I think what you are saying is that we need to normalize it, lay down the cards on the table and say, here is what it can do, what its physiological impacts are, and then eventually what the mental impact are.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think it's all about, right, everything that we do, Seema, is about this, around this. It always boils down to, let's have a conversation. Let's have an open conversation about it. And the minute you bring morality in, the minute you bring religion in, the minute you bring culture in, what happens is, there's always the generation gap, right? Oh, you all did it this way, but we don't do it this way. And the conversation stops.
Correct.
So I think we have to not bring those things in, and we have to just make sure that right from the time they're 4 years old or 3 years old, we are having those open, according to the appropriate age, we are having those conversations with our children openly, without saying, in our time we did it this way, therefore you will do it this way too.
Absolutely right.
Do you think that is the reason, that because we are not having this conversation, that addiction is on the rise? Because now, like I said earlier, right in the beginning when I introduced you, we were talking about how addiction is now gone beyond just drugs and alcohol. It's gone into screen time. It has gone into so many different areas. Pornography is another one. So
gaming,
there are gaming, video games. I mean, we've had students who have told us that they were completely addicted during the pandemic. So there are all these different now forms of addiction that have started emerging. So do you think in your research and in your interaction with these patients, that have you seen that addiction is on the rise?
definitely addictions on the rise. You see, there's one thing is that trial is on the rise, because it's become a little more, people have become a little more open about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So today the number, the drinking age is lower than it was, say, 20 years back or 30 years back. Today the number of women drinking is high. Again, that's a social phenomenon, right? There are more women in the workforce, and they're out there, and therefore so trial has increased. But I always say this, and this is never going to change. Every person who has a drink is not going to turn into an alcoholic.
Alcoholic.
Every child, even maybe when he's 16 or 17, who's going to experiment and have a drag of a cigarette, is not going to become a compulsive smoker. It's not going to happen. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what are these risk factors.
Yes.
Sure. Please do.
What predisposes? See, when if you look at all the research that's been done in the area of addiction, and now and talking about addiction as a disorder, right? The Diagnostic Statistical Manual defines it as alcohol dependence syndrome. Now it's defined like that, right?
Okay.
So the research that's been done in this area, it shows us what are, it takes this, so there is one view saying, is it genetic? Can addiction or addictive behavior be inherited? Is
Right.
it, so that's something also that's being researched repeatedly.
Wow.
Now, while there may or may not, we can't definitively say that the child of a person who's an alcoholic will turn into an alcoholic. It is
Right.
definitely true that the addictive patterns, addictive behavior, right? And I'm going to define it in a very simple word, which is easy for everybody to understand. We call it the ICE personality: impulsive, compulsive, and excessive. ICE.
ICE. Okay.
Right. So the ICE personality is, so a person could be even a workaholic or a shopaholic, right?
Yes.
He or she could be in their 40s, 50s. And so they could pass on that addictive behavior gene onto their kids. Right. And if, therefore, since when we talk about risk factors, what is it that the child is going through? Is the child facing difficulties in their academics? Is the child having to face, let's say, frequent change of place and adjustment issues, changing schools too often, changing residences too often, changing countries and cities too often? All of this is happening, right? So if there is an addictive behavior pattern in either or both parents, even grandparents, that is one risk factor. That is definitely something to watch out for, right?
Okay.
If for instance, if the mother is a compulsive shopper, right? Now, I'm not talking about something that's harmless. I'm talking about someone who can't stop. Even if we look at eating disorders, which is like binge eating, and then which leads to bulimia and all these conditions, does the person have an eating disorder? Is the person eating compulsively, not for nourishment, but to fill an emotional void?
Right, like a coping mechanism that you
absolutely. So when those things are happening, we have to watch for whether those children are definitely
at risk. Okay, got it.
Right.
So those are important things to think about. It's almost scary because you without inadvertently, you may have passed on a gene to your child.
Yes.
But if you are aware that that is present in any member of your family, then you must look out for that behavior pattern in your children also. So what can parents do? I mean, I hope you're going to give us some nice solutions for this, Meena.
Of course, Seema. And which is where I want to talk about, and I know your series is so powerful. I watched quite a few episodes, where we're talking about parents getting honest with themselves. And just like what Deepma said just now, it's not like we are dictating a certain thing to our children and we say, this is perfect and you need to follow it, right? I think recovery, starts from understanding ourselves.
Right.
And I say this to parents of all addicts, especially young addicts in their teens, 20s, saying that let's look at ourselves and see what is it about our behavior patterns that is making life a little difficult or unworkable for our children. What rules have we imposed? What conditions have they grown up in? For example, again, coming back to the risk factors, if it's a difficult marriage, I find that it's not a set thing saying a child from a broken home or a child of divorced parents will turn to addiction. He or she may not. But again, it's very easy because it's about a whole set of factors and probabilities coming together to create this outcome. Correct. So let's say the mother is a compulsive shopper, the marriage is not working, there's been a separation. And like you said, what can parents do? Parents can get help themselves first.
Correct. So
Yes.
resolve
Parents
their own
can get
issues
honest.
first.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
So if the parents are getting help, like I've done recently, especially after COVID times, with all the difficult relationships
Mental health.
coming out
Yes.
and open in front of the kids.
Yes, it's
Otherwise,
come out a lot.
parents would go to their respective places of work. The kids would be in school, and a lot of stuff has come, under the light of closer examination thanks
Work
to
from
COVID.
home. Yeah, the work from home
A
syndrome
lot
has
of it
created a
was
lot of stress.
insulated. Yeah, a lot of it was insulated because you were in separate places altogether geographically.
And
Now
time
it's all
spent was
happening
very
together.
narrow. Now the
Yeah.
time span widened. So
Yeah.
little behavioral quirks, every single thing has gotten, it has come out.
Highlighted. Yeah, it has become
Yeah.
accentuated. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, because you mentioned the pandemic, and one of the things that has happened in the pandemic is screen addiction. I mean, our children are doing everything
Yes.
online. We are doing everything online. I mean, it's kind of scary when I get that message from my phone that your screen time has gone up by 8% last week. That
Yes.
that
Yes.
I kind of feel really bad that, oh gosh, I've been looking at my phone a lot.
A
So
lot.
somewhere
Yeah.
this addiction is creeping into not only in our children, but the screen time addiction is getting into even adults.
Yeah.
So what can parents do, and how can we as a family sort of cope with this new form of addiction that has emerged?
Right. Thank you so much, Seema. And you said it in the first line. The moment you said my screen addiction has gone up, right? Uh, Children, the most important thing, and I'm sure it's been covered by various parenting experts in your program too, children learn by example.
Correct.
We want children to do what we tell them to do, but they actually do what they see us do.
They are
Yes.
seeing us with the phones all the time.
Yes,
So then
If they
obviously,
see us with phones, if they see us binge watching, binge eating, drinking heavily on weekends, they are getting a message that this is okay.
This is
Correct.
okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And they may or may not do it by choice, but they're definitely getting a sanction to say, if mom and dad can do it, I can do it.
correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Very
Absolutely.
many years back, I think some 15 years back, I attended a parenting seminar back in the day when such things were not so common. And I heard this gentleman say that, do what you want your kids to do. So if you want them to inculcate a reading habit,
Then read.
then read.
Yes.
Read yourself. Yes.
Correct. Very true. Very
So
true. We've
one
been
is
saying that
that
for a long
they
time.
do what
So
they see
long.
you do,
Yes.
not what you want them to do. If you
Right.
want them to eat healthy, then you eat healthy.
Exactly. Yep.
If you
And,
exercise, they're going to exercise.
you're talking about eating healthy, so my husband and I, we are very much into, we've gotten into this whole thing for a very long time because we had a serious health concern a few years
Okay.
ago. And as a result of that, we kind of changed everything, the way we were eating, the way we were looking at food. And while our children are not exactly following it, I know that at some point when they reach that point of making those right choices,
Yeah.
as adults, they will be able to pick the right choices because they've watched us over the last 5 to 10 years. They've seen the impact of what happens when you don't eat healthy. So you're absolutely right that we need to, as parents, first set the example. If we want our children to be strong, we got to be strong. If we want our children to resist temptations and, have the ability to say, no, this is not okay, I can't do this, we got to do it first. So you're right, we need to normalize that in the house first, and we need to emulate that behavior so that the children can then follow.
Yeah, I was reminded of a meme. I just read this meme, and it was funny, but it was sad at the same time. And that was an 8-year-old or 9-year-old in the meme. They were showing this 8-year-old or 9-year-old who was cramming for exams, right?
Yes.
And getting really stressed out about the exam and was not able to remember whatever it is that he or she had to remember. And he said, "Oh, I'm so stressed. I need a drink." 8-year-old.
Yes.
He was saying something he had heard. He had never, obviously he had never tried alcohol if he comes from a normal family. And I'm sure, that wasn't something that was normal, but I'm sure that was a wake-up call to the parents, right? Because they were saying that in front of the child when they were stressed. And so for the child, a coping mechanism for stress is what?
Drink.
Get a drink. Yeah. So how do we know? Supposing now we're talking about this as a preventive thing, but what if it has already happened? What are the things that tell us that our child is addicted? Are there any signs that we can look for?
Or some pattern, that he is
of behavior. What are your thoughts on that, Meena?
Yes. some of the obvious things are, of course, to watch out for. If you're saying substance addiction, and if the child has already got addicted, then there will be signs, right? There will be, needs for increased pocket money. The child's grades will start suffering after a point. Of course, I have met some very intelligent kids who manage to keep up with their grades in spite of, spending a lot of time with peers who consume, addictive substances. But yes, these are some obvious signs. The health begins to decline, sleep patterns change.
Yeah.
Consumption of food can be abnormal, which means it can be too much or it can be too little.
Oh.
All of these things start. Also, kids tend to become loners. Either they associate only with a particular peer group, spending large spans of time by themselves in their rooms.
But Meena, isn't it becoming very common? I mean, all teenagers, so many parents we speak to, because we have taught so many kids, and we talk to the parents also.
Yes.
Kids, especially during the pandemic, have become loners. They were sitting at home all the time,
yes,
in front of a screen. They were not socializing. They were not allowed to go outside because of the pandemic. So that pattern and that insular temperament has really already crept in. So,
they're
so
constantly in there, what Seema calls the cave. They're constantly
I
in
always
their
tell my teenager, like, can you come out of your cave, because you don't leave your chair. You're just sitting in front of the computer all the time.
So you have to add on different other red flags as well, I guess, to the fact that they've become more lone, wanting, as it is teenagers, they want to be in their room and they want the door shut. So
so there's a little difference between wanting their space to do their thing, but what I want to look at is, what are they doing in the room? Are they hooked, to a device, or are they doing yoga? I mean, that's a happy thing. And like just right before this conversation, we were talking about the gifts of imperfection and what Brené Brown says, right? Where she talks about the importance of connection. Okay. And one of a very important, something that's been written up about addiction, and which I think now rehabilitation centers all over the world are following, which is to say that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Wow, that is very powerful. Very powerful. Yes.
Yeah. And a person who is connected. So I'd be very happy if my teenage daughter is doing a Zoom call with all her friends, because in her room, and she needs the space to do that, and that's perfectly all right. It's all about, if you are connected, you won't get addicted, because addiction is a very lonely place. It's you and your substance, whether it's you and your bottle, you and your joint, you and your whatever food, right? You and your screen, you and your pornographic site, you and your gaming handle. Addiction is extremely lonely. So I think one thing that parents can really do is to have conversations, like, about friends, not in a sort of, because kids get very defensive, saying, why do you want to know who I'm seeing? Why do you want to know where I'm going? It's not about that. If we can just pick up little cues from, if kids are sharing things like, these guys did this on their holiday to Belgium, let's say, it means they're connected with happy, normal, healthy people of their own age.
Yes. We actually encourage parents to, for example, when a child walks in, we always tell the parents, don't start with how was your day, how was school, because you're not going to get any answers.
Interrogation ho jata hai na,
yeah, why don't you ask something? Hey, who did you have lunch with today? What was at lunch? What did you have for lunch? Was there somebody who didn't show up in school today? Was there a teacher who said something very funny, or did something interesting happen? Or did something really terrible happen? I mean, I think that we have to, in a very non-judgmental way, very non-threatening way, have these crucial conversations, which may be really, really basic, simple things, but they give you a lot of clues. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Absolutely.
About our children.
The one thing that prevents a person falling into any addictive behavior pattern is being connected. The other thing is encouraging, like you just said, encouraging openness,
Yes.
Also, and how are the kids going to be encouraged? Again, that same principle applies. Suppose I have a bad day at office, I come home and I tell my kids, you know what, today this thing happened. And I felt so terrible, but I still feel that if I had taken a deep breath, maybe I would have handled this situation this way. So where you're saying you are admitting to your own imperfections, again, which Brené talks about. Because the more we come across to our kids as saying, Mama is perfect, Daddy is perfect, they can never go wrong.
Yes.
The minute they make a mistake, they are so ashamed.
Correct.
Again, Brené talks about shame as one of the most toxic and difficult emotions to handle,
Yes.
right? And there I want to say this, that one of the things that is common with addicts across the world, across socioeconomic categories, across ages, is shame.
Shame.
Every addict suffers from shame, and at some stage they've been shamed, even before they got into addiction.
Yeah.
So shame is an emotion that they've just not been able to heal, right? So
Yeah.
if we say, you know what, today I went to gym and I was wearing two different socks. Oh my God, I was so embarrassed.
Yeah.
Right? And it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's
okay
fine.
to be
Yeah.
embarrassed, and it's okay to say, oh gosh. And I
No,
mean, this
and
might be a
that's
very funny sort of example. It could be
yeah.
something a little more serious.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
I think that's what it is, right? It's the shame is connected to the sense of judgment. Like people are, if I ask a question, I'll be judged. If I do
Yes,
something wrong, I'll be judged. If I look terrible, I'll be judged.
absolutely.
If I
Yeah.
so many things, right? So many things that
Yeah.
children are constantly worried about, and it starts very young, and that's shame sort of builds and builds and grows and grows, and the person becomes lonelier and lonelier, which
Yes.
can lead to so many forms of addiction. So
Yes.
what it's not important what form of addiction, but the fact that there is loneliness behind it, there is
Yes.
shame behind it, there's a fear of judgment behind it, and those are the things that we need to really pay attention to, because yeah, we need to okay and normalize a lot of things. Okay, you
Yeah.
mixed up the socks. That looks great. You have a great
Oh,
fashion
well.
sense. Yeah, I think
And
that,
the thing about it is what happens is then the children come up to
Mhm.
you and try to make you feel okay. An example I had was, many years ago, I was doing a talk on something and I was telling the story, the butterfly story, where the butterfly is coming out of the
Mhm.
cocoon. And I messed it up. I messed the story up. And, there was like 100 people in front of me and I just lost track of the story. And I
Right.
the
was
hungry caterpillar. You're talking about the hungry caterpillar.
no. The butterfly, the guy helps the butterfly come out, the caterpillar become the butterfly and come out of the cocoon. But
Okay.
somewhere I screwed up the story.
Mhm.
And I was mortified at the end of it. I salvaged it somehow. But
Mhm.
when I came home, I was like, God, I screwed up that speech so bad. I'm like mortified. Oh, God, they think I'm so dumb. And I was being very, very hard on myself. And my daughter, I think, was 9 or 10, and she was about 10, yeah, 10, 11. And she told me, she said, Mama, they won't remember, don't worry, they won't
Wow.
remember anything. And she was comforting and consoling me. But in that moment, I hope that I was able to show her that I screwed up, and you comforted me. When you screw up, I'm there for you.
So
Kind of.
isn't this something similar to what Brené Brown also talks about, which is
About
vulnerability?
vulnerability. The
Vulnerability is
word she
courage.
uses
Yeah,
is to be okay with your vulnerability. And Deepa, if I may add, I'm sure you did that because that's how she learned that behavior.
correct.
I'm sure you comforted her when she's gone through difficult situations, doubting herself,
Yes.
right? I'm
We
sure you've
always
done
are.
that. And then she came and she was able to do that. It didn't happen, you did that, or her dad did that, or somebody did that. Because if the child hasn't seen that, they would not have learned that behavior. It would
Yeah.
not have become a part of their repertoire of coping. My
Correct.
mom is crying. What do I do?
So
Yeah.
I want to.
And she was very uncomfortable with me not being okay with how I
Yes.
had done, and so she wanted me to feel better. So you're right, she came back
No,
to me.
I want to emphasize on this point, because I think it's a very, very important point that you guys have made, which is we don't, as parents, don't have to constantly show this image of being this perfect person all the time.
Yes.
And when we show our vulnerability and then talk about, oh, I could have done this, we show the strategies and mechanisms to cope with that vulnerability,
Yes.
is when we are actually having a teaching moment for our children.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
So that's a beautiful insight that you both of you have shared right now. I've learned something here. Great.
Thank you so
So,
much.
so
And one more thing I wanted to mention, Seema, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Because it's part of this.
Yes.
Which is that if we look at the basic thing, of why a child gets more excited about looking at a game. Now, I've had parents talk to me about online teaching go completely haywire, because the screen is on. Nothing stops the child from opening a game in another window and going up there. Why is he doing it? Not because there's something wrong with the child. It's just because the game is more interesting than the class.
It's not as boring.
And we admit it, Sometimes we pick up a very heavy philosophical or spiritual read, and then after a few pages we put it down, and then we want to Netflix for a bit. So if we do
Yeah.
it, that's exactly what they do, right? So
We
why
had an interesting situation that happened in our class with one of our students who we had a scenario that we did in our leadership communication program called pushing your boundaries. So
right?
one of the students talked about how he pushed his boundaries. He's probably 14 years old, and he said that during the pandemic he started playing a lot of video games, and and he's a very good
Very
student. He's an
tough.
A-star
Yeah.
student, academically very sharp,
Hmm.
involved in sports. He's a really good student,
Yeah.
but because of this pandemic and the online thing, he started doing a lot of video games on the side. It became so addictive that the teachers started noticing that his grades were going down. He was becoming more quiet. He was not participating in a lot of the conversations. He was not being the person he was.
Yeah.
And they pulled him up and said, "You will go into detention if this behavior continues." Because that's the standard response of every education
Academic. Yeah.
academics, so school care, this is the parameter of finding out. Instead of looking deeper and saying, why did this really good student
Happen.
turn
Yeah.
into this person, we
Absolutely.
jump into, okay, now you're going to go into detention. So he decided to open up to his mother, which
Mhm.
I give full marks to the mother, because she has created an environment where of
Yes.
non-judgment. Okay, you can come to me if there's a problem. So let's create that environment of non-judgment. He approached his mother and she said, you know what? I recognize your need to play the video game. At the same time, you also understand that academics is important and you need to pay attention in class and you need to participate. So let's create a plan. And they
Yes.
created a plan which included time allotted to playing video games. So now he goes back to school knowing that he will have the time to relax playing a video game for a short time or whatever the time they decided. At the
Yes.
same time, his studies and his academics and his involvement in school doesn't get disturbed,
Doesn't
which
suffer.
I thought was such a beautiful way of encouraging a child to, instead of saying, how dare you do this? How can you do this?
This
Instead
is
of
wrong.
blaming
Yeah.
and yelling at them and, the punishment versus reward thing, the mother actually took him into a very safe environment and said, okay, let's figure out how to cope with it. So, can we talk about these coping mechanisms? What can parents do to
Yes.
help their children? Because this is a simple example, but there can be very serious levels of addiction. And how can we help our kids?
I think one thing you put it out right there, saying negative reinforcement doesn't work,
Doesn't work.
right? The threat of a punishment no longer, is unproductive. Even if it might deliver some short-term results, in the long run, it's going to be very damaging,
Yes.
right?
I know. There are lots of parents who take a lot of pride in saying, "हमको तो बहुत थप्पड़ मिला था when we were small."
I know.
One, you behave badly, one थप्पड़ you will get and you will become strong. That's
Yeah.
it. And nowadays तुम लोग बच्चों को थप्पड़ नहीं देते हो. That's what
Third is later.
parents-
I've heard men say, हमारे पिताजी आंख दिखाते थे और हम we
We
would
would get
zip and go
scared.
inside.
Yes.
My father had to just raise his his eyelids and look at us, and we got the look and we knew what to do. That
But the
was
world has
ordinary
changed.
parenting, and maybe, I mean, thank God if it worked very good for you, but it's
Yeah.
not like you
It,
said, it's
it
not.
worked
not in
in
this
those
world.
days. I think it worked in those days because the availability of a lot of the stuff that is available very easily today was not there. So it may have resulted in, like what we were talking about earlier, Meena, it may have resulted in other types of dysfunction, but it did not probably result in addictions, right?
Yes.
That is,
Yes.
and I think that's why parents tend to glorify that simpler time of the past where all of these things were not there. But unfortunately, like we said, these things exist today.
Yes.
And we're going to
Yes.
have to live in this world, and we're going to have to parent in this world, and we're going to have to hope that our children grow up and as functional, wonderful members of society in this world. So then we're going
Absolutely.
to have to provide them with the kind of solutions that work in this world, in which punishment, gentler parenting, I think, seems to be the norm now, where
Yes.
this thappad wala cheese is not going to
Doesn't
work.
work anymore. Yeah.
Yes. So Deepma and Seema, I do want to make a mention about, this very difficult word to talk about, which is discipline. You know,
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about discipline.
Sure.
And the one thing that really guides me is this classic, which is The Road Less Traveled, where Scott Peck talks about discipline. And the first thing he says is he talks about something called delayed gratification.
Ah,
you know
yes.
And that is so important to build as a skill in children, because it is not only important for them to do delayed gratification so that they get good grades, so that they get into good colleges, and so that they could get good jobs. It's just not about that. Delayed gratification, Scott Peck talked about it so many years back, I think in the 40s and 50s. And then later, Daniel Goleman came and talked about EQ and emotional quotient, which is nothing but, if you look at the first experiments that were done, I can give you one candy now, but if you wait for 10 minutes, I can give you 2 candies. What does that tell you? It tells you that a person should be able to go through a little bit of difficulty, a little bit of hardship to enjoy a reward in the future.
Well said. Yeah.
It is so simple.
Yeah.
So I think
how do we do that? How do we create that enthusiasm for the marshmallow experiment? With, wait, because the children, we know that the children who waited over the next 30 years did really well.
No, and instant gratification is becoming an epidemic, I think, and our children are suffering because of that. We think as parents we are being very nice to them, but I think we are doing more damage. So let's talk a little more about that, Meena. Tell us.
Absolutely. So, inculcating good old-fashioned discipline is very, very important. It's all about, like you said, we have to do it gently, and yet we can't not do it. Correct. So one thing I find very important in this is that mothers and fathers have to align on their parenting styles.
Yes.
Very important. Dads, are you all listening?
So the moms are always right. No, I'm kidding.
No, because moms are the primary discipline
caregivers. Yes.
Givers, right? So I mean,
let's not forget, kids are really intelligent. If there is a little bit of a loophole, they're going to find it and they're going to exploit it.
Yes.
Right? So as parents, let's get wise and understand and have good communication among us about, what are some of the, I won't even call it rules. What is the kind of framework in which we're raising our kids? Correct. It's so important. Like, this is okay. This is kind of iffy. So let's talk about it and resolve it. Or this is absolutely off the charts. Yes. Right? Right. So I think coming together on parenting, understanding these concepts, like, like what is really delayed gratification? And it's a very important virtue to be built.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. Like if, for instance, if you tell a child in the first 5 minutes of any series, even if it's a cartoon, right? If you're going to get bored and you're going to shut it, what's going to happen? You're never going to watch the whole movie or the whole episode. Right. As you wait with patience for that story to unfold, you start enjoying even an experience like entertainment. There is a little element of delayed gratification even there. Right. Yes. Like the kids who read, other kids will be patient with the first 2-3 chapters, wait for the plot to thicken. Correct. And then you're going to love it and it's going to become unputdownable. So these are all experiences, samplers that we need to keep giving children. So
but just to clarify, so for example, there are a lot of parents who say, if you finish your homework, then maybe you can have 30 minutes of video games. Is that the same thing? Or are we talking about something
I think it's very,
it's very much the same thing.
It works. Get your work done and then enjoy it. And the child will also realize that I have far more peace of mind to enjoy my entertainment than when I have that nagging feeling that the homework's undone. So you're setting some very healthy habits,
Yes.
Saying, get your work done and then really, put your feet up and chill.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think when I was raising my children, we did another thing where we kind of increased the time span with which the reward was coming. So the first, when they were little, it was like, if you finish your homework, you can watch a cartoon. Then it was, if you finish your homework 2 days in a row, then you can do, something, a greater reward. If you have, and we used to do the star. My daughter's 23 now and she still loves gold stars. Wow. So we did the star thing where if you got the star all 5 days, Monday to Friday, then Saturday, Sunday, we could go out somewhere and do something fun and have an ice cream and do something. So we kind of made it where you had to do something consistently for a period of time before you would get a reward. You can't get, every time you do something good and check a box, you're not going to get a reward. There's going to have to be, you're going to have to do it for 5 days, 7 days, 10 days in a row. Then we made it every exam. If you do well in every exam, then we said, so we kind of did that. And I'm hoping that created a certain level of what Seema talks of as grit and resilience.
Yes.
And discipline, like you were saying. So what else can we do to kind of inculcate positive discipline in a gentle way, to have behaviors which then don't tend towards the, because that's every parent's fear, right? Abhi
Right.
15-16 साल का हो गया, अभी मेरे को टेंशन है कि supposing someone offers him something, will he take
No,
or
and
she take it?
also I want to be a little bit gentle with the parents also, because it's not an easy thing, right? If you
Yes.
discover that your child has got some addiction, it's not an easy thing to deal with, because there will be some frustration, there will be some
Yes.
disappointment,
Yes.
there will be some shame, there will be some fear, like Deepma said, that what if my child accepts a drug, or what if my child becomes addicted to video games? So I mean, there's a lot of fear in the parents as well. So how do we speak to our children about addiction without this shame and this judgment and this fear and this frustration? Because one of the biggest things that children deal with is disappointing their parents, whether we like it or not. That's a fact.
Yes.
Children worry about disappointment. Even at this age, I worry about disappointing my parents. So, as a child, that is a very big thing. When you see that in the eyes of your parents, there is disappointment. That is actually very negative. So how do we what can we say to parents? What kind of help can they get? What kind of strategies and tips can they use to sort of start this conversation?
Like I said, Seema, the first thing is to be open about everything, to be open, to create openness and to have open communication. That's the most important thing. I think when communication starts to break down is when problems start to happen. Right? You show me a home where not by a rule, but like, people sit down and eat together, or I don't know, exercise together at least once a week, or where they sit and watch a film together. The more separation and isolation there is, the more there is room.
So the connection is what you were talking about. Through open communication, we need to have connections, very crucial connections.
Also,
just remember the word together that Meena is using all the time. Together. Any sentence that you end with together, you're going to be able to create that connection that you're talking about.
Absolutely. Also, when we're talking about discipline, I think it's very important, for parents to understand and evaluate their response. And is it a response or is it a reaction? When something goes wrong, okay, so let's say that the teacher wants to meet you, or the principal wants to meet you, and there has been some behavior which has created a need for the school management to meet you. How are you responding to that? Are you going into a panic? Are you more scared of meeting the principal than the child himself or herself? Right? Because
what the heck
let's talk a little bit about authority figures, right? And let's not forget that most of us have been, very strictly brought up. The teacher, the principal were these figures that we looked at with reverence. And we said, my God, if the principal has called, means aaj to band bajne wali hai.
Band bajne wali hai.
Right. And then you react and you go to the kid and you say, what the hell did you do?
What did you do?
And you're freaking out before they've even had a chance to kind of process that information. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm saying that's where we need to, everybody's talking about mindfulness and being aware of where we are at in a conversation. Your child has just come home and, delivered this news to you. Maybe he or she is already in a panic. And you say, okay, we got to meet the principal. Okay, sit, let's talk, let's have chai. Okay, you go, wash up, freshen up, come, let's sit down and talk. And it's going to take some practice and some doing, because
I was about to say that it's not that easy, right? So sometimes we have to say, okay, let's insert a coping mechanism right here. First step, delay the response. Go take a shower, go wash up, have your snack, then we'll talk about it.
Yes.
What that delay, again, it's like a delayed gratification, but a delay will allow you to sort of regroup your own emotions, your own fears, your own disappointments, so that then you respond with the right way, in the right way with your child.
Absolutely, Seema. And that, let's not forget, the child is petrified himself or herself. Maybe their degree may be lesser, because
have empathy.
This generation, it's not it's not as scary as it was 20 years back or 30 years back. But let's not forget, the child has taken up a lot of courage to come and tell you the principal wants to see you. It could be that the child takes a decision and says, I won't tell them, maybe the requests have to go home. I remember in back when, I was in grade 6 or 7, this child who was caught for forging signatures on the report card. Such things used to happen. They would forge the parent because they were petrified of saying, I've failed in so many subjects. And grading systems were much harsher back then.
Yes,
And these things would happen. Why is that happening? Let's look at it. Why is it happening? The child does not have a say with the parents, right? At the end of this entire thing, talking about discipline, what Scott Peck says is, what is the best thing we can give our child? The best thing we can give our child is unconditional positive regard.
Correct.
And that's where he comes the closest to defining what that parental love is.
Yeah.
That if a child is going to come and tell us something has gone wrong, the child will only do that if he trusts that we are going to look at it with unconditional positive regard. You're my child and I'm there for you. It doesn't matter what, but I am there for you. And then, of course, you get into the conversation, you get into the specifics, the details, and then there's opinions and there's negotiation, and all of that process will continue.
So the first step is to have that parenting should teach you is empathy. You need to look at your child with empathy. You need to acknowledge that this must have taken a lot of courage for them to even come to you.
Yes.
They have messed up, they may have made a mistake, but it takes, so if you start from a place of empathy, I think you will be able to have a more, I think, constructive conversation, and it can lead to more openness and communication and that togetherness that we were talking about, which is so beautiful. I think this reminder and this mindfulness is so important for all of us at any stage in our lives.
In our lives.
And not necessarily in a parenting situation, in any situation, even in
absolutely,
even with our colleagues, with our team members. I think if we don't have that sense of empathy and understanding, I don't think that we will be able to function in a normal way.
Yeah.
We practice it till it becomes our natural behavior. It is not something that we have to think too much or we need to, rehearse and deliver like a speech. No, if we are conversant with this, if that is our normative behavior, that's what is going to come out when we're talking to our kids.
Absolutely.
That's what's going to come out in difficult situations.
Absolutely. Very well said, Meena. And I have to tell our viewers that Meena has her own rehabilitation center. She's been working on it for the last 10 years. She does a lot of one-on-one therapy. You have a de-addiction treatment center. That's right. And you have done so many things that help in healing childhood trauma, which is such an important job that you are doing for a lot of people. And we are so, again, grateful and honored that you spend this morning with us and to talk to us about this very important subject.
One last question I wanted to ask Meena.
Yes, Deepa.
Is, we talked a lot about what we can do in order that addiction does not become an issue. Yes. Right? How do we parent? How do we discipline? Gentle parenting, conversations, doing things together. We did a lot of this. There will be parents out there who have just discovered that their child is into something, either drugs or alcohol, or like you said, porn, or screen addictions, video gaming addictions, and all of the different psychological and physiological addictions that you mentioned. Once I discover that my child has some kind of a problem, even if it's not a full-blown addiction yet, what do I do? Where do I go? I know that we keep saying we have to destigmatize it, but in India, it's still a very big stigma. So how do I help my child and find someone else to help him if I can't, him or her, if I can't?
Or to put it differently, is that the point when we have to really go to the expert? I mean, is it something that we should immediately go to an expert, or that's a really good question.
How do we help our kid?
Yeah.
Right. I think it's so important, Deepma, what you asked, because it's difficult, it's stigmatizing, it's difficult to talk to even your own neighbor. Sometimes maybe, like you said, your own parent or your sibling, right? And there are very few experts, and there's different stages of addiction, there's different kinds of treatment. I just want to say a little bit about, treating addiction. Treating addiction involves first thing is separating the person from the substance of addiction, irrespective of his or her age, right? And that can only happen if the family and the person are committed to doing this. Okay. So the first step is that. So you bring a period of abstinence, when the person can be removed away from that, especially if it is something like, a life-threatening drug, any of these behaviors. So how are we going to do that in the gentlest possible way? And how are we going to have this conversation? I'm happy to help, like I said, and the entire family needs to be involved.
Yeah.
Please feel free to share my number, because
Sure.
it's a delicate conversation to have. I'm speaking to a lot of people, who have just discovered the first signs of addiction, or they've discovered some kind of substance in the
Something
child's,
that's scary.
pencil
Yeah.
box or something, you
Yeah.
know. So the first thing is how to have this conversation. A mother, father need to know how, in a gentle way, even for them to have that conversation. There's many de-addiction centers. So a lot of times people will say, we don't know whether this child, let's say, since we're talking about kids, will counseling alone help? Does he or she need residential treatment? These are the questions that
Correct.
come up in the landscape. So I meet a lot of parents. I speak to them. In fact, I speak to parents like pretty much all over the country. They call me, they talk to me about what is the next step we should take, right? So the
Correct.
first step is, again, for the entire family to connect and say, we've got a problem, let's solve it. And hiding it and denying it are not solutions.
Not
Though
solution.
they are the first reactions that come up, saying, "Ne aap theek ho jayega," maybe he or she will learn, and things like this. If it has come to an extent where the child needs
Help.
the child needs to resort to that behavior repeatedly,
Right.
otherwise it wouldn't have come to your notice, right? So I
Right.
think the first step is getting honest with it, saying and accepting it. Acceptance is the first step, saying I
And
have
for
a
the
problem.
child also, no, it's so
Yes, and that
important
it's
to say to,
okay.
you're not all bad. We'll figure this out
No,
together.
and I think,
Figure this out.
it's so funny because when you have a heart disease, or if you have a diabetic problem, if you have a liver problem, you immediately go to the doctor. That's a physiological reaction to a disease. This is also a disease. It's just mental. There's no difference really. So we have to stop stigmatizing this and normalizing that this is it's a behavioral issue, but it is a
Yes.
mental health. It's
Yes.
called mental health for a reason. There is a health issue here.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let's not
In
make
fact,
it yeah.
In fact, it's not just addiction, even taking counseling and therapy. I think I'm happy to note that the stigma is going down, going down.
Slowly.
People
Yes.
don't feel. I saw a stand up talking about being in therapy. I mean, I love their guts and the courage, the way they talk
Yes.
about being on medication. My shrink said this to me, and they're so open, right?
Yes. Yes.
So the important thing is to say something's gone missing. It's either an error of omission or commission by somebody. Some wrong message has been picked up. Somewhere the child feels that if I keep resorting to this activity, and even they know it's a temporary solution, but they've gotten attached to it, dependent on it, right?
Correct.
So there are many, many stages even before addiction. It's like trial, and then there is a stage of dependence. The child becomes
Yes.
dependent. At that stage also, if it's found out, and if we can, break that dependence and come out of it.
Before it goes to addiction. Yeah.
Yes,
Full
but I've
blown.
got
Yeah.
to say this, that people have got to be honest, they've got to be open-minded,
Yes.
and they've got to be very choosy about what kind of treatment they're going to,
Take.
have the child undergo.
Yeah.
And that family counseling, it's not his or her problem.
Yeah.
If a child has got addicted with, in the presence of parents, grandparents, siblings, and everything, somewhere something has gone missing.
No, and you talked initially about even genetic disposition, right? There might be a genetic connection to this also.
Yes.
So their disposition anyway towards this was very high to begin with. So yeah, it's not an individual person's problem. It's a family problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no need to get defensive about it. I didn't do anything wrong, Baba. He's now doing this wrong thing,
That
and
is
now
so
I have
true,
to hide
Deepma.
it.
That is so
Right?
true. The parents' ego comes in saying, what have I missed out? The first thing that parents go through is shame themselves.
Themselves.
Saying, "Oh,
Yes.
how come my kid turned out like this?"
Correct.
And that's where we need to stop thinking about my kid as my, some kind of my possession or a part of me. We've got to allow kids to individuate. And this is something I work very closely with in the inner child healing programs that I do, where I say giving children space to individuate, to develop their own personality. And because then, they've got to make it in this world on their own.
Correct.
And we can support them, we can love them unconditionally, we can nurture them, and yet we've got to be okay with them being individuals and having their own life, their own identity, and their own future.
Right, absolutely.
Beautifully.
And that is the hardest lesson for any parent, right? A lot of parents, when their children go off to college, and that separation anxiety that they have is because they are clinging on to them, and they need to understand that they are individuals. They need to have and lead their own life and explore life in their own way. And that's a tough one for most parents. And I think this advice that you give, Meena, is absolutely on the dot. Yeah.
Thank
Super.
you. Yeah,
I'm so glad that
grateful
you
for
are people.
counselors like you
Yeah.
who, who not only demystify but destigmatize it. Plus, it's confidential. So, parents can go to counselors, children can go to counselors, and you can tell as many people as you want and not tell either if you don't want to, if you're not comfortable. So, I kind of like that.
I would
having a
also
third person.
I would also like to say that this is important for the other stakeholders, the other people who are involved. For example, if I have a friend whose child is going through this, then as
Yes.
a friend, I should also show that unconditional support to my
Support.
friend
Yes.
and what they are going through as family. So let's not just leave everything to the parents and the family.
Yes.
Even everybody who is around them, the ecosystem around this child also needs to be activated, and they also need to have an understanding. They need to give the suggestions that maybe we can bring in a counselor, and they need to be empathetic towards this
Absolutely.
situation. And I
That
think
is so true, Seema. In fact, I want to share this that, I used to do these de-addiction awareness programs at Shri Ram School in Gurgaon. And many a time, it is the healthy child who has come to me saying, ma'am, I think my best friend is doing this and there's some trouble in their house. And
Yeah.
sometimes, and we talk to high school kids, and sometimes at the end of a session, I've had a child walk up to me and say, I think, ma'am, my mother's going through alcoholism.
oh
It's
wow,
happened.
wow.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's good to open up this
And
Yeah,
the whole
conversation
thing
so
is
this
saying
stuff
it's
comes
okay to
out.
talk about it, and
Yes.
get
Yes.
help, whichever. It could be a friend, it could be a cousin. So in
yes,
fact, it's more important for those who, I'll say, who are fortunate enough, who've had a healthy childhood, and who've received, good, healthy, happy, balanced parenting. It's good to have them listen to stuff like this, because they can take it on. They can support their friend
Become a
or cousin,
supporter.
or
Yeah.
somebody
Correct.
who's going through a problem like this.
Yes,
right,
now more than
absolutely.
ever, like we always say at the Confident Communicator, now more than ever, it takes a village to raise a child. So let's be there for
Yes,
each other, for everyone. We're not living in joint families anymore. We're not living.
absolutely.
Most families now, in the urban areas, especially, most families are nuclear families. So then let's be there for each other and each other's children instead of sitting there and judging and saying, पता है वो उसके बच्चे का क्या हुआ, पता है वो क्या, instead of that,
Absolutely.
let's be there for each other.
Yes, yes, वो हमारा भी
And I
बच्चा
think,
है.
and
हमारा भी
I think it
बच्चा
can
है.
only happen with these kind of conversations. I don't think it can happen unless we talk about it. And I think we are in a culture where we don't have this openness and this conversation. And I think that's
Yes.
a mold we need to break.
Yeah.
I think that we need to be having these kind of very critical, crucial conversations, which is seriously the goal of imperfect parenting. And we are so honored to have guests like you, who come and kind of demystify so many of these, predisposed thoughts that we have around important topic like addiction. So if there's nothing else, I think I'd like to thank Meena Iyer to be here. Definitely we'll be posting her phone number as well as her information on our Facebook page. Thank you for joining us today, Meena, again, and for our viewers to be here listening to this wonderful, wonderful conversation. And we'll see you again next Wednesday for yet another episode of Imperfect Parenting. Thank you.
Thanks, Meena.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.